Hi, everybody. Welcome to our panel. I'm really psyched to be here with three extraordinary panelists. My name is Eileen Cho. I'm a senior editor with Engineering News Record. I've been covering transportation infrastructure projects for almost 30 years. But what I love about my job is that it's just become so much more than just writing about the next signature bridge or the next port deepening project or the next airport terminal. It's stuff like this. It's technology. It's mobility solutions. My job has just never stopped being fascinating because we cover an industry that keeps being fascinating. So I want to get us started. I'd like to ask each of the panelists to do a brief overview. You see their titles, but let's get a brief summary of basically what you guys do. You want to start with George?
Sure. Well, welcome everyone. It's great to be here in LA. I'm a technical director for a global steel consortium known as WorldAutoSteel. So WorldAutoSteel is comprised of the 18 largest global automotive steel producers. So automotive is the key word there. And what we do is we work with world-renowned institutions and universities and engineering organizations to execute research programs. And during our 25-year history, we've developed 6 large-scale vehicle concept programs, and our latest is titled Steel Emotive. And basically, Steel Emotive, if you've had a chance, and if not, in the exhibit hall, you'll see some posters and a TV showing some of the video around the styling of the vehicle, et cetera. It's our vision for what we call autonomous ride-sharing or mobility as a service vehicles that squarely put us on that path to net zero emissions by 2050. So we're quite proud of that vehicle program. We've got a representative from Ricardo here. We selected them. They're a UK engineering and consultancy group that did the styling and all the engineering details. And I'll just add that it was about a 3-year program. We started at July 1st of 2020. So essentially, COVID stopped the world and stopped travel, and we invested in mobility. Kind of an irony, huh? Right? So anyway, that's it.
All right, and thank you all for coming. My name is Jarvis Murray, and I manage regulations and policy here at Los Angeles Department of Transportation. And under my little portfolio, I manage the regulation of taxi cabs and ambulances, non-emergency medical. We also manage scooters, so the scooter program that's here, delivery robots, and I also manage the bike share program, so the metro bikes that you've seen outside, as well as the Blue LA EV car share program. And so it sounds like a lot, but a lot of it is because I have very great staff that works with me on these programs. And so that is my role at the DOT. So I'm often the point person when a new mode enters the city to begin operation, or if someone wants to do experiments. LA, we're very good about experimenting with new models. And so when those things do come, they often fall in my shop to begin the discussions about mobility, about adding them onto data platforms, as well as just trying new things out. And so that is my role here at DOT.
That's great. Oh, well, it's really wonderful to be here. My name is Shinpei Tsai. I lead cities and sustainability policy, global policy for Uber. And a way of thinking about the work I do is our team manages all the urban impacts, all the urban issues as they are relevant to the company across mobility and delivery. So we have sustainability, accessibility, we have all of the different, the whole product suite, and all the different ways that you move around a city or get things in a city. And it's an honor to be doing that work and to see the ways that Uber can have an impact in the city.
So with that, Shinpei, I want to start with you. I still remember taking my first Uber ever, like, what was it, 15 years ago? But and I was like, I can't believe this. How does this even work? But going back to the origin, was the idea of sustainability always baked into the company, or was that something that evolved over time?
That's a really good question. I think that there was the promise or the potential, the vision of potentially having that kind of impact of, eventually getting to electric, so you have lower emissions, eventually reducing the size of the vehicle. So we have bike and scooter share on the system in over 200 cities now through a partnership with Lime and Timbisi in Latin America. And you're starting to see that as the company has become more global, that is a possibility. We did make a commitment in 2020 to be a zero emission platform. So that kind of put the fire, right? Like we decided to sit on the fire and see what we can do in terms of the decarbonization side. And I would say that, unlike a lot of other big companies that look at decarbonization through carbon sequestration or offsets or other ways of managing carbon, we were really trying to take a good look at our role in the urban system and think about ways that we could electrify. And electrify across all vehicle types is what we need to do in order to make this make sense. But we start with four wheels because there is a very meaningful impact that you can have with four-wheel electrification. And so I think it's been a journey, to be honest, but I also think that the company is getting there and choosing and biting off the right kinds of initiatives to focus on.
And in that vein, Jarvis, I know, look, this is Los Angeles. Talk about four wheels. They're everywhere in Los Angeles. So how have you been, you've just mentioned all these things that you're sort of managing. How do you put it all together to try to create a comprehensive ecosystem that promotes sustainability, especially in a place like Los Angeles?
That's a great question because that's really a lot of what the challenge is. It's integrating all of those different things. And even as we try to integrate them data-wise, we're often trying to work with, does what works for this group or this mode work for that mode? And so even as we begin talking through, for example, as I do the car share program, it's primarily grant funded. So I'm able to do a lot of things in terms of building the infrastructure to get those vehicles on the road. But when I'm dealing with, for example, my taxi cab drivers, I've been around. I was here, or not here, but I was in San Francisco in the days when everyone had Crown Vics as taxis, and just getting them to start using a Prius was really difficult. And it was such a big fight. And of course, you have protests, and they circle City Hall, and now they're all fine. Everything is worked out, and so that's a little bit of where we are, I think, today on the EV side. But they do have some real concerns. And, in the regulatory space, I often have to manage the business side, meaning I have to do things in a way that ensures that they can still be profitable, because you never want the regulatory policy to be the thing that destroys the business. If the business goes down, you want it to be because they're just bad. Mm-hmm. They're bad at it. You don't want it to be your fault. And so every little lever I move, it affects them. And so if I were to make a mandate such as everyone has to have an EV vehicle, could they do it? Eventually, sure. But do we have the infrastructure for it? Most of my drivers don't live in single family homes. They live in an apartment. And so I have had drivers get those vehicles, and they'd have to park them down the street to try to charge them. So there's a challenge. There are some real challenges to the future sustainability, but like the Crown Vic thing, we'll eventually get there.
And George, a similar question for you. As part of the Steel Consortium, when did that people in that space start to go, oh, maybe we should try to really push for sustainability because it's the right thing to do, and B, how do we make money off of it eventually?
Yeah, that's a really great question for us. So I guess sustainability for us really, our minds changed on this topic more than 10 years ago when we started looking at the fact that we were advancing powertrains and making them very efficient, and electrification, of course, and all those things started reducing the emissions out the tailpipe, but it didn't eliminate them. And so we discovered life cycle assessment as a way to really account for all the emissions associated with the vehicle. We started working with the EPA here in the States, but maybe most of our effort was with the European Commission and DG Climate, who they basically write the rules and policies for for measuring emissions associated with a vehicle. And that's migrated to today. They now have new rules in place where they're going to start to require reporting from the OEMs on an accounting of the emissions from the production of the materials and the vehicles to the use phase, which is their operating life, and then what they do at end of life. So that goes into effect, I think, in 2025. It's a start, right, to start to report and account for all that. So then we were doing research into future mobility, and frankly, maybe many of you don't know much about steels, but a lot of the concepts that we were seeing introduced out there were concepts showcasing aluminum or carbon fiber, some of the direct competitors to steel. And it kind of appeared that we were maybe absent at the table, but as we did this research, we found that there were a couple really key things that were going to change mobility. One was urbanization, right? So get more people moving into the cities, and yet that were characterized, especially mega cities like LA, characterized by pollution and congestion and gridlock and limited parking and very costly parking, so much so that the cost of vehicle ownership were becoming a challenge for many people, and it was changing attitudes around vehicle ownership. So there was a disinterest in ownership, and we realized that probably the right solution was ride sharing and autonomous ride sharing. Our vision was that if we could develop autonomous ride sharing vehicles purpose fit for mobility as a service, that could, as I said, really we could address all the sustainability metrics associated with that, and really develop from a clean sheet some concepts that we could make available to the automotive industry. So we developed this program. There's two basic concepts: a small 4-passenger urban vehicle and an extra urban 6-passenger vehicle. And we're basically these are concepts, but they're highly engineered and validated for crash performance, et cetera. And we're making all of this open source and available to the key automotive stakeholders. So that's basically what brought us here.
Can I say something? Thank you. It's really great to hear about the innovation that you're having with that you're making in the vehicle space, especially for places that are more car dependent. It's really important, and I love the idea that you're open sourcing the technology. But I just want to, because we're a global company, I do want to make sure that the audience also hears another view of urbanization and transportation, mobility systems, which is that you move more people through public transit. That is the best way. That is the way to go. That's the backbone. And I know the company I work for, but but there's a role for rideshare, and I think you're hitting on that role, which is in places where you have car-dependent land use patterns. These are ways of filling gaps, because you cannot build the kind of transit that is going to move the people, because you already are stuck with, you're sort of locked into a very low density land use pattern. For the vast majority of mega cities around the world that are urbanizing at that rate that you're talking about, this, it's more the multimodal system, the platform of the entire mobility across all modes that are really going to make a difference. 80% of vehicles purchased around the world today are 2 wheels. The emission savings from 2-wheel vehicles, the electrification of that is incredible. The work opportunities from being able to access a 2-wheel vehicle is also amazing. So I do want to just get us out a little bit from the LA mindset and offer a bit of a global view, and to think about the mobility system in a very holistic way. I think Jarvis's portfolio really speaks to all the tools in the toolbox that you can put against and complement the fixed route, fixed schedule systems in such an interesting and innovative way. And then the vehicle technology that you're speaking to, all of these things have to come together for us to really address this climate emergency. So I just need to say that.
Oh, that was great.
Can I add something
You
to
heard
that?
it here. Uber exec is promoting transit, people.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
Eileen, that was great. And I just want to say, when you step back and you think about how do we transition from driver-centric vehicles to shared mobility, there's a lot of factors that are really important. The first one from our perspective, was comfort. We needed to make sure that the vehicles were comfortable to access, so people could get in and out of the vehicles efficiently. These vehicles have a very tight turning radius, We heard a lot of stuff about curb management, so it allows you to get into the curb and out of the curb quickly. It has a low step in height, so these are things that address comfort, but part of comfort is also safety. And you need to make sure that these vehicles are safe, and so our vehicles have been developed. They are high speed. These aren't going to be used in a geofenced area. So they have to meet global high-speed crashworthiness standards, and we've validated those against all the global requirements. So that's the first side of it. The second side of it, picture kind of a three-legged stool here, or Venn diagram. The second side of it is affordability. So you need to make sure that this is an affordable option for people and a better option compared to owning a vehicle, right? This has to bring merit to them. But it also has to be low cost in terms of the mobility service provider, because they basically want a profitable business case. So you have to leverage all the tools you have to make sure it's affordable, and that's one of the big advantages that steel brings to the table. And then I already mentioned the sustainability aspect of it. But when you do migrate to autonomous operation, these vehicles are connected to infrastructure and other vehicles, and so they're always collecting data and processing data real time. And what they do is they basically smooth the acceleration and deceleration, and just that operational smoothing cuts emissions by 15%. But additionally, when you remove from our perspective, autonomous, if you remove the driver, you can put more occupants in there, and I think that's what you spoke to. If we can put 3+ passengers in one of these vehicles, now you really eliminate other vehicles on the road. You can eliminate the congestion problem, which means you're reducing emissions even further. So it's kind of a big formula that comes together, and this research taught us a lot, but we're really, really excited about being a player in this space.
So it's like you're trying to create a hybrid solution that kind of brings together TNC technology as well and autonomous with a sort of a low mass transit vehicle. So Jarvis, you've got the Olympics, you've got the World Cup coming up. I'm sure traffic is a huge concern for you in so many levels. Do you see these as potential more solutions in the toolbox?
I definitely do. And so, we don't actually need the freeway, right? It's closed down, no one can get in.
Armageddon again?
But really, I do see that as tools in the toolbox. But it's interesting to me because, let's say, and I'm in the regulatory space, and if I didn't exist and there were no regulations at all, I guarantee you there's still going to be a person hopping in the car to pick up people, to drive them around. It's just one of those things. You're going to have like a jitney service.
Yeah, or gypsy cab.
Yeah, exactly. And you have them even in the regulated space. So in my mind, there's always been some gap in transportation everywhere that has required that kind of service. And so one of the things that we kind of struggle with as a city is when we think about the future of rideshare, maybe it's autonomous, right? But then the question then becomes, so what do we do with all the workers? What do we do with the drivers? Is there a role for them? Is there a way to evolve? And that's a little bit of the challenge that we're faced with in terms of dealing with those kinds of things. And but I do see a world where we will evolve in that direction. I think it makes the most sense. And I do think at some point, it's really the more people in a vehicle is going to be the best option, but there's always going to be comfort. And there's always going to be, the family with children. Like I'm someone who doesn't drive really, but I know that when my son was small, I would rent a car because it's just I wasn't dragging my 4-year-old 2 hours on the bus. Just wasn't going to do it. So I think those are the kind of things that we have to think about. And then even as we think about the sustainability of it, our big concern as well is going to be, what about our customers that need assistance, our wheelchair customers, our elderly customers? Right now, there really aren't a lot of purpose-built wheelchair accessible vehicles that are meeting these sustainability models. I can't think of an EV model out there for wheelchair accessible vehicles, at least not that I'm aware of. And there's barely like a hybrid model, I think. Because right now, most wheelchair accessible vehicles are, they're just kind of redone. they're added on. You add in these little pieces, and then you make it go, and the vehicle can't even sustain it. So they're hard to even keep and maintain. So there's a lot, I think, to all of these things as we think about the future of it. I do think it's part of the solution, but we have to think about those other pieces.
So, George, will your vehicles be ready for deployment in time for Jarvis to have his nights be better slept?
Yeah, so we used what we call a technology roadmap to really understand the readiness of the technology. And frankly, our target deployment dates for these vehicles are in that 2030 to 2035 timeframe. We think that all the policy issues, et cetera, will be resolved by then, and maybe some of the other questions that I know that are out there based on some recent performance issues. But frankly, these are necessary. If you look at the data on safety, I think 110 people in the U.S. are killed every day in vehicle accidents, and 90% of them are due to human error, right? So there's a real opportunity here that we believe in, and we know we all want and need. We just need to to resolve some of the early development issues, and I think we can get there.
Well, from the Uber side, where is Uber in terms of like the autonomous journey?
I think we're in a place where we have some options. I think our vision is that it's a mobility platform, and hopefully it's a mobility platform that a lot of AV companies will want to partner with, and so that there's a maximization of the options for the customer. I also think that it has to be linked to our sustainability efforts, so both on the electrification side as well as the diversity of mobility options. And it's interesting to hear about like ways that we can fill gaps, because one of the conversations that is going on is about reducing car dependence. So we know that we live in cities that have been invested in a way where it makes it very challenging not to drive. And so there has to be a role for AVs eventually. On the other hand, could all of these different solutions help a household shed a second car or avoid or delay a purchase of a car? And I think that's a really interesting question. We just ran a campaign experiment in Australia where we invited 50 people to give up their car for 1 month and gave them a transportation budget. We gave them an access to a cargo bike, some ride-hail credits, car share credits, all transit pass, unlimited transit pass. And it is very, to George's point, it's very, very difficult to compete with convenience, reliability, affordability, right? Mm-hmm. What made a difference? There was one major finding, and what made a difference was if you could provide 4 options for everyone, including walking and biking, that felt safe. But if you could provide 4 realistic options, so for middle-aged people with kids, it was like me, it was walking, biking, transit, and ride-hail. That would help us avoid a car. And so I think, all of these things are converging where AVs then ultimately will be specific routes. They'll still be mixed drivers plus AVs, because not every single route is, I think, compatible with AVs.
Sure. Yeah. Well, George, you and I were talking a little bit about this at lunch. And sorry, but I did try an Uber pool once back in the day, and I may have just gotten unlucky, but I had a really unpleasant experience with a stranger yapping away loudly on her phone next to me. How can all of you talk a little bit to what it will take to change mindsets like mine and really get people comfortable with the idea of like, maybe I have I get one of George's vehicles and I'm going to an Olympic event, but I'm willing to ride with 3 other total strangers. How do we, from all your perspectives, how do we, address that?
We're actually, we deprecated Uber Pool during the pandemic for obvious reasons, and are slowly bringing it back online. It's been redesigned, so hopefully you don't have a repeat of your unpleasant experience. But really, it's trying to solve the times when congestion is at its highest. It's trying to also solve for greater efficiency. So there's better routing, there's better transparency to the driver. They opt in, they can choose to accept. And generally, we try to do better matching so that people are seriously going in the same direction, not randomly just picking people up 2 by 2, one and two. So I think that has actually it's actually been a really big improvement in terms of driver acceptance, riders. It's actually exceeded many expectations in terms of adoption. So we've been rolling it out. We're going to expand this year, and so you'll see more about it. So hopefully that helps tweak it. I think that's going to be a big question for AVs too. They're going to be shared vehicles. They're going to be on high volume corridors, and that so that kind of idea of being able to share a vehicle ends up being much more prevalent as we think about the future.
Jarvis? Or George?
Well, I think, for us, it's going to be hard to just change people's minds about something like that. And I really think it's going to come down to cost and convenience. If we can make the transportation in a way where it's easier to do the shared ride than it is for me to do my single solo ride, and then people will do it. But you will always have a group that just won't. And I'll say for myself personally, I can take a subway, I can take a bus. I do not want to do an Uber pool, just don't. But I'm a solitary kind of guy. Like I don't. But when I'm getting on a bus or a subway, I know what I'm getting into. But when I get into an Uber pool, I'm a little bit like, no, I'm not doing that. Yeah, but that's me, right? And it's more about convenience and comfort for me. So. I don't know if you can necessarily change people's minds. I really think it's about creating the infrastructure to allow them to have choice.
I actually just have an idea before you go, George. What if you combine a dating app with an Uber?
There's a reality show, isn't there?
Yeah. Oh, look, this guy, you can ride with me, whatever. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm not sure how to compete with that one. What I was going to say is I've got personal experience. I've got a son that lives in LA, and he Ubers quite frequently and is comfortable with pooling, and called me old school when I didn't want to do that. So now I'm embarrassed into trying it. But we talked about this at length in our program. Couple answers. One is it's a mindset. It's tough changing people's behaviors, but we have to change people's behaviors in order to reach net zero. We're not going to get there if we electrify the world. You've got to reduce the number of vehicles on the road and congestion and some other issues. And so we have to change the behaviors. And part of us feel like, once you do it a couple times, you realize it's not so bad, and you accept it, and you do it more. The other thing was, Shinpei, you mentioned this is a global problem, and it really is. And cultures are different, even though this is a global issue. So, for example, in China, they've not grown up with owning vehicles, and they're readily acceptance to ride sharing. That's how they get around now in the mega cities, Beijing and Shanghai, et cetera, right? So if you look at the mega cities across the globe, there's different levels of acceptance, and I think that's probably a bit natural, and we'll see a progression over time.
All right, I'll try the Uber pool one of these days. One of these days. I won't say when. Are there any questions in the audience? I can't see a thing, so okay.
It's a question for anybody who wants to ask. My name is John Penny. I couldn't get that right, but here I am. In Rideshare, and you could probably pick different countries, I was really interested in two things that were said, the Australia example, and then multiple people in the car. Not necessarily the pool example, but multiple people. So the specific question is, does ride sharing reduce vehicle trips? Because if it doesn't reduce vehicle trips, X the difference in the efficiency of the rideshare car versus the personally owned car, by definition, it's not sustainable, especially if it's stealing from public transit. So could you give us any thoughts on that?
The report is going to come out I think it's going to come out next week, so you should check the website. But the There were 4 cohorts of people, and there was a baseline. So there was like a control group of someone who drove, and we did trip counts. And then there were 4 cohorts of different demographics: people without any dependents, people with dependents, people who are like empty nesters or in the different stage of life. Over time, if you could provide those 4 options, there was also trip shedding, because it is really a pain to be doing so much logistical planning, honestly. So the trade-offs, the time trade-off, all those trade-offs start to become way more apparent, and every incremental trip had a cost. Very interesting. So we gave everyone a budget of, I think it was 1,300 Australian dollars, which is about 1,500 US dollars. That is the kind of sort of accepted research metric for our general cost of owning a car. People did not use their entire budgets. We thought they would blow it on delivery. We included delivery because we felt like that also avoided trips. You could one-way delivery versus a round trip to get something. So we included that, and we thought they're going to just blow this whole budget on Uber Eats. That not happen. People were very, very smart about their budget and did not even use it up. So those really interesting findings. I mean, over a whole city, having people go from 21 trips to 17, 19 trips is meaningful. There was one participant who said that she used to, just for fun, go shopping with her car because it was something to do, and she said she saved a ton of money too, but also had fewer trips.
I thought that was a really great question and a good assertion on what will happen if you don't put multiple occupants in that vehicle, right? And so that's the part of the study that we had as well, and the results from that study. The sustainability question has to be a comprehensive strategy, right? So, for example, to get to net zero, we feel we can get to 86% of that by 2035. And the way you do that is you green the steel. So the entire steel industry is working on greening strategies to reduce their CO2 footprint associated with the production of that material. You got to green the electricity grid. There's activities on that. From our perspective with this vehicle program, and I don't know how many of you are in the automotive space, but if you consider a conventional vehicle, when you put that vehicle together, you stamp out the parts in a die, right? You got steel or aluminum blanks that go in this die, and then they get trimmed, and about 50% of the amount of material that you produced is called engineered scrap. It's waste. So you produce twice the amount of material that you need for the vehicle. So that's waste, and that's emissions that are going up in air right now, right? And you wouldn't know this, but the steel industry really benefits from a low carbon footprint compared to our competitive materials. They are 6 to 17 times heavier in emissions at the production stage compared to steel. But in order to really make a difference on the sustainability associated with this vehicle, we use very thin steels. That we can do that because we have this incredible portfolio of steels with very, very high strength levels. And those also contribute to safety. So we reduce the thickness of the steel. That means we're producing less. We use more efficient fabrication processes, not just stamping, but other processes that use steel 90% efficiently, very little scrap. And now you've produced a whole lot less material for that vehicle. So you've reduced the emissions associated with that. And I already mentioned, I think, the operational features associated with autonomy, right? And of course, recycling and what you do at end of life is really important. But those are some examples of how you address this from a real comprehensive point. And then on the safety, just one more point on the vehicle. If you take a look out there, what our research found was that people really, if they're sharing a ride, they'd like to face each other. They do that for social reasons or working reasons, but also for security. They don't want to ride share with the stranger and have their back to the stranger. So we have inward-facing seats, right, which creates real challenges for crash. But because of these modern steels that I described, we're able to manage that, and we were able to develop solutions that make that vehicle very, very safe. And then if you get people to accept that and accept the inward-facing right positions, you get more people in a vehicle, and you're going to need 3 people plus. Otherwise, you've just created a bunch of ride-sharing designs that haven't reduced the number of vehicles on the road, and you still got congestion. So it's a real comprehensive approach. We feel pretty good about where we're at on this journey.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm here. Irina Slavina, Blue Systems. I have a question for Shinpei. In your opinion, is there anything regulators could do to make your operations more sustainable? And question for Jarvis, is there anything rideshare companies could do to enable you to help them be more sustainable, at least in Los Angeles? I'm sorry.
So there are a lot of things that can be done, and it's. I'll just say that it's part of the interesting thing about transportation and the space and all the things that are happening and growing is the fact that Uber and the regulatory body can sit side by side and actually enjoy each other's company. So things are different, and I do think there are a lot of industries and companies out there that are working to make these models more sustainable and better for the community overall. I hope that we've learned a lot of lessons and continue to learn lessons as we go. So the thing that we care the most about is, for us, getting the data to understand what's happening on our streets. So in Los Angeles, that's the number one thing. And even as I have this portfolio of different things, what we often try to do is, I have a GIS specialist on my staff, and he tries to layer maps over, where my bike share stations are, where our car share stations are, where are our taxi stands located, where are our non-emergency medical trips most happening. And so we try to put these things together to help figure out things such as, are we actually contributing to the mobility network? Do we have these isolated islands that aren't being properly served? And a lot of that is really the best way to really understand it is to have true data related to it, because we've spent a lot of years, at least on our side, dealing with a lot of what we call it anecdata, where we all kind of have an idea, we kind of know that this is what's going on, but we don't know that it's going on, and so it's the real-time data for us. And if we have that, and if we can work with that, then we can do a lot of work in terms of planning, infrastructure building, and doing things in a way that's not just serving pockets of our community, but the entire community, and developing something that's going to be worthwhile in the future.
That was great. I think we are like 98% overlapping. And very much agree about being able to share a stage and really enjoying it. So I would say that there's been a real change in tone and, I would say, dynamic between the companies and the regulators. One thing that we're finding is when we can have that initial trust and start to have conversations like we are, even currently having with CPUC, you can read our public letter of interest on the latest conversations around the Clean Mile Standard, which is literally regulating rideshare for emissions. We can start getting much more creative and innovative. We can think about one of the greatest barriers is the vehicle acquisition for EVs or the lack of charging in multi-unit dwellings. How do we think about ways of supporting drivers to be able to access those kinds of vehicles? And so, we get into conversations about driver assistance funds, which happen in other markets. When it comes to charging, we are providing some aggregate maps on demand forecasting with cities to give cities a better sense of the kind of charging drivers would most benefit from in the neighborhoods. And interestingly, it's a complete overlay with Justice 40, the US DOT's Justice 40 communities maps. So we're trying to fulfill part of that piece of the puzzle. I think the 2% I was talking about, maybe it's even less than 1%. I think it's just the real time is a real challenge for private sector companies, and I think we can talk more about it later. But I think that's been the sticking point. But there is quite a lot of data given to CPUC, although I do understand. I think sometimes there's some friction between getting the data from, this other entity over down to the people in the cities that are planning it. And I think there's much more that could be done there too.
We can probably squeeze in one more quick question if anyone has any.
Hi, Monica Wagoner, LA Metro. And this question I think is mostly for Jarvis and Shinpei, but coming from the transit perspective, we're often finding sustainability and equity put in opposition to each other almost, because things that we do to improve sustainability may increase costs or reduce capacity. When we're talking about rideshare, and I love that you called out transit. Thank you so much. I'm really intrigued by the ability of rideshare to make transit a more feasible option for people. But as we push for sustainability in rideshare, what do you think is that going to improve or exacerbate the inequities that sometimes exist in that sector?
I guess I have a follow-up question on that one. But let me just say that I think we have an Uber transit team. They work with transit agencies precisely for first last mile. They have access to the same marketplace, let's say. So the more that we can get drivers into EVs, the more that those trips will also be in EVs, even if they're confined, for the transit agency to that first last mile. So like there has to be an origin destination of a transit station. That's the idea. So on the one hand, I think that actually helps maybe with some of the equity, because that's where usually at the edges of the system is where there's more affordable housing. And so if the transit agency can pick up some of the costs of bringing people to the system, people who might not have access to a car, then you keep people on the system. And they have mobility access in a way that they might not otherwise. There's usually a huge time cost that is like a huge burden on lower income communities. Can't speak much about sort of like the systemic infrastructure divide. I don't think that this is a silver bullet, but I think that it's sort of a transitionary tool, right? Like you can bring people to the system, you can fill some gaps, you can increase the utilization of vehicles. And I think what's really interesting is the drivers on the ride-hail platform, just by proxy analysis, tend to be more representative of people in lower income communities and communities of color. So there's that angle of it too. So these are fragments, like not a holistic answer, but I think you start to get at least improving the mobility access options.
Yeah, and actually I would agree with that 98%. No, actually I do agree with it, and I think the only thing that I would say that may be slightly different is that we would also need to be, being the regulatory body and being the agency that kind of manages the streets, bring the services to those places. Because a lot of what we often try to do is, we know we're gonna get service downtown. We know we're gonna get service in certain parts of the city. But as Shinpei mentioned, we have a lot of people who live out in the further parts where it is more affordable. And you're right, your drivers are basically my drivers, and that's where they also live. And so we're often our role is to actually get those areas, those choices. And one of the things that we are often concerned about as new modes come in is, will you be servicing every part of my city or just some parts? Are you a luxury service? Are you or are you something that's a public good? And so that is a little bit of the challenge, I think, that we often have. But I think our role is to push those choices out there. And some of the things that you do see on the rideshare platforms, on like the Uber type platforms, is that those services tend to actually be more reliable in those areas. And so, a lot of that is a good thing, but it's really having the access to those services in those areas for us.
These guys will be around during the break if you want to continue some conversations with them. But in the meantime, give them a hand.